Hello again. I would just like to give a little bit of a background before I go right into looking at the assessments that I use in my class. I haven't actually taught in about a year and a half, so most of what I will talk about here and look at is related to my most recent teaching position. As an ESL instructor in a college intensive English program. Um, I'm in a little bit of in a different situation because I tend to be a little bit less structured in my teaching. And I think that because of the subject matter that I'm teaching, I think allows for that flexibility. I kind of have the perspective that because the content is English, anything that they're doing in English, they're learning. So I tend not to focus too much on the student outcomes, which we have instead of standards. I do I look at what the students need, what their weaknesses are. So I tend not to focus too much on standards. It's really kind of a unique position that it's a language learning class. It's something that, wouldn't work with other subjects. But yeah, that's kind of the way that I work in my classroom. I would also like to add that most of the assessments that I'm going to introduce are for a high-level writing class or bridge class that prepares the students for college level writing. So that is what we're going to look at next.
And this would be a rubric that I would use for their final writing assignment. It's pretty simple. What I tend to do over the semester is I start with a very simple rubric and I add different elements for each individual student and their weaknesses. So this rubric is directed towards a particular student. So perhaps the student has problems with past tense verbs. I would add that to this rubric. Maybe he has weaknesses in his introduction, so I would add the introduction element to this rubric. All students, like I said before, the rubrics start off with a kind of general format, and they all have specific elements in them that all the students are expected to understand and be able to integrate well into their writing, but other students have particular areas that they're weak in, and I add those on throughout the semester. I was planning on showing this instruction guide for their portfolio, for their essay portfolios, but as I was looking at it, I'm not sure if this counts as an assessment or not. I guess I'm unclear if this is something that should be included in here or not. However, I think there's value in showing it, so I'm just going to go ahead and do that. So these are the requirements for the portfolio. So I am giving them the reason for the portfolio, giving them a good background so they understand why they're doing this, who is the audience, and the different parts of the portfolio with the points for each part broken down. And more information on the specific parts and how those are broken down. So I guess it's not exactly a rubric, but it's a general explanation of what they should be including in each part of their portfolio. The reflection, and that is broken down. And that is it for this particular creation of a portfolio. Another assessment, another less formal assessment would be the self-assessment guide for writing. And these are common mistakes that my particular population of student tend to make, and this is for their own guidance when they're writing their essays. So these are just common error sentence fragments with examples and corrections, sentence sprawl, misplaced and dangling modifiers, just different types of common grammar mistakes within their writing. So this is the first part of the questions that we are to answer this week, assessing towards standards with performance assessments. Who designs performance assessments? This is all the instructors do, and they make their own decision about what type of assessments they want. How are performance assessments organized? Do they contribute to a portfolio? Again, different instructors choose different types of performance assessments, or not even performance assessments at all. I usually organize my assessments around textbook, and I usually have them, or I usually assign assessments that are related to the content textbook that we're doing, and I work towards, all the assessments work towards a portfolio. How many performance assessments are there, and what does each one reflect? So I tend to go a little bit slower in my teaching, and so it just kind of depends how much we get through and what type of extra work the students really need. So if they need extra work, we may be doing fewer assessments. How do performance assessments relate to standards? Which set of standards is it? So we use student outcomes and instead of standards, and we tend to focus on what the students really need to learn. So I've included here briefly what our student outcomes are for a high-level bridge writing class. Just to give you a general idea of how it's different than maybe public school or grade school. How do performance assessments relate to curriculum? So our curriculum, instructors choose, at least my most recent position, we chose our own textbook. So the curriculum, so it's difficult to articulate. First of all, our general curriculum, it's all individual. And plus, if we're teaching as an ESL instructor, the curriculum changes over time. So if they're low-level students, they're really focusing on basic functional English. And as they progress through the program and they get into higher levels, then it focuses more towards academic English. How are the rubrics developed and used? How are performance descriptors developed and used? Are they shared? So each instructor creates their own rubrics, or maybe they don't. I'm not sure exactly what all the other instructors are doing in their classrooms, but I am assuming that most of them use rubrics, and we do share materials. I don't know anyone who's turned anybody down for a request to share materials. So this is the second set of questions that we are asked to address this week. And so this is performance assessment in an intensive English program, college English program. So because in college there's a lot more time and resources that are available to address areas that might require more attention or should require more attention. Some of the challenges are, or some of the some of the challenges end up really being benefits. So, for example, if I'm only teaching 3 classes, that's only 15 contact hours a week. And that allows me, of course, it's a little bit my choice how I want to spend my time outside of class, but there is a lot more flexibility. So, time and effort also depends on the learning environment. Um, one of my roles in one of my positions was as a writing coordinator, and I got a course release to be able to do that. And so my responsibilities there were to just improve the writing curriculum and program that we have within the IEP. And one of the things that I could have done would be to work on rubrics and assessments in a lot of different ways. So I should have been collaborating with the other instructors. I could have been working on it on my own. There's a lot of time. I think I had 5 hours a week to be able to do anything within the scope of the writing aspect of our program. We use standardized tests mostly for placement. Although at my position in Iowa State, we were in the process of trying to create our own authentic, I guess we call them authentic, assessments. But there's still the TOEFL. The TOEFL is used quite regularly to allow students within. It's an assessment to identify whether they are capable of being college students, or if for foreign language speakers, or if they need more language work. So the TOEFL is used quite regularly. And so because we have a lot of independence as college instructors, we also can use whatever we want and create our own assessments within the classroom, but then program-wide assessments are kind of more of the massive project that I think is probably seen in public schools. One of the challenges is that not all college instructors have a background in education. When I started working at Iowa State University, I had just gotten my master's degree in linguistics, and I had a TESOL certificate, but that was like one class, so it wasn't a whole lot of education background, and that is relatively common in higher ed. Some of the benefits, so like I said, there's a lot more time and resources. So some of the things, one of my first thought was, yes, they're performance assessments, and I'm not sure in a writing class what I would be doing besides, giving students assignments as to write essays. And they're also directly related to what the students will be doing. Content will be different, but directly related to what the students will be doing when they progress into regular college classes. And what I have done in the past is to adjust rubrics for individual students. So there's the initial rubric, which I kind of recycle over class. If I'm teaching the same class, I'll just recycle the rubric, but then adjust it according to that class and individual students as well. And yes, thinking about the rubric and creating the rubric does allow us to think more deeply about what is beneficial for the students. And it depends quite a bit on how you're using the rubric. Sometimes instructors are lazy, like myself, and like I said, I can just reuse rubrics and not put a whole lot of thought into it. And that's actually considered a benefit, and I would consider that a benefit too of reteaching a class, as you could just use the same rubric over again. And because it's higher ed, there's not a lot of collaboration. We're all really independent. I think that's one of the reasons why many of us are in higher ed, is because of the independence that is allowed. So we don't have Common Core or the other standards, so that didn't really apply here. Um, One of the benefits is that thinking more deeply about rubrics and performance assessments allows us to think more specifically about solid educational principles. Like I said, we don't always have a background in education, and so this kind of forces us to engage that aspect of our profession. And the last part that I want to look at is a performance assessment planning template and the quality rubric. As far as the template goes, I struggle to come up with something to say about it because it's hard for me to have an opinion unless I'm really working with it. So, yeah, I can glance at it and maybe get some sense of how effective it would be for me and how useful it would be, but it's not supported by any actual information until I'm really trying to use it. Um, the one aspect that I did kind of question was the narrative, and I'm not sure, um, that didn't seem to be something effective, or like I said, maybe I just need to use it a little bit. I'm familiar with other types of assessment, the backward assessment and the one that Wiggins and McTeague um, constructed, and this template seemed to be quite a bit more simple to use. I have a whole book on the whole Wiggins textbook that I used for another assessment class, which I liked a lot, but I tried to construct some content based on that book, and it was just so overwhelming. There were so many different parts, and it was just really hard to work with functionally. And I think I found the rubric more helpful than the template, and it might be just because I'm more familiar with rubrics and I have a general sense of how they work more than the template. And I think both of these tools could be really useful in my teaching context. Like I said, they're pretty generally straightforward. I found the template a little bit more complex than the rubric, but like I said, I've been familiar with other types of assessments that the the theories behind them were really appealing, but trying to actually use them I found really difficult.